Hello, UCEA, and welcome to the 2022 pre-session. My name is Monica Byrne Jimenez, and I'm proud to be the Executive Director of the University Council for Educational Administration. We are excited today to welcome the White House directives of the Educational Excellence Initiatives to a discussion about their roles in shaping the national educational landscape. Our panelists will share their experiences working with the White House initiatives and the intersections of their work to address their community's needs, possibilities, and potential. We'll also talk about looking ahead to the future of public education and the role of educational leadership in creating a more just society. We hope to engage them in a free-flowing conversation about their work, about the potential and the opportunities embedded in their work, and how they see themselves connected to a larger legacy of equity and justice. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Thank you.
On Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, or what we call WIONP. I was born and raised in the state of Hawaii, and I come from both immigrant and indigenous roots. I am Native Hawaiian as well as Japanese American, and my mother is an immigrant. My father is Native Hawaiian. So I think that is very indicative of the diversity of our Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities, who include over 40 distinct ethnicities that speak over 100 different languages. So I started in public service, working at the state level and state government for the state of Hawaii in a DC bureau for one of our offices, and worked on the Hill, spent the past decade on Capitol Hill before being appointed to my current role as the executive director of our White House initiative. I've been in this role for a little over a year now. And so we have been just, hard at work to really ensure that we are promoting equity in all aspects of the federal government to ensure that our students, our teachers, our administrators, and really all components of diverse sectors of our communities have access to federal resources and programs and initiatives and are connected to the federal government all across the country.
Wonderful, thank you. Maggie.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for having me. I'm Maggie Siddiqui. I'm director of the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships at the U.S. Department of Education. I started in this role in May of this year. This is my first time in government, aside from an internship I had in Congress back in college. And my professional background is really in faith community leadership. I went to seminary. I'm trained as a Muslim chaplain. Much of my career was spent serving in Muslim community nonprofits with a focus on interfaith bridge building and advocacy in public policy. Happy to be here today.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to follow my Zoom box and ask Dr. Trent to introduce herself.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Deetra Trent. I'm the executive director of the White House Initiative on HBCUs. I have a somewhat of a long history in government, unlike Maggie. About 25 years. I've worked for 3 governors. I worked for a member of Congress. I served as Secretary and Deputy Secretary of Education in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so a large part of the work that I've done has been really in the higher education space, equity space, public policy space, and just really trying to work to enhance opportunities for communities of color. And so I'm very happy to be here and excited to have this conversation.
Great, thank you so much. Jason.
So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Awajia Gada. My English name is Jason Cummins, and I'm a member of the Abzaliga Nation from South Central Montana. And how I come to this work is a good question, because it was like I wanted to help my community. That was the motivation for it. So when I did go to school and college, words like career, profession, or career trajectory were really foreign to me, and they're still really foreign to me. But my motivation and core was, okay, I feel that education is the best vehicle for helping our communities. And so if there was another avenue, I'd probably be in that, because I really do believe education is the best avenue. So I've been a practitioner, a school principal, superintendent for approximately 20 years, and then worked with principal prep programs and mentored principals in the state of Montana and a few in the surrounding states for over a decade, and just really into principal prep and school leader prep, because school leadership is it really makes a big difference. So that's how I come to this work, and I'm glad to be with this distinguished group of leaders.
Thank you, Jason. Melody.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here with all of my wonderful colleagues. My name is Melody Gonzalez, and I'm Executive Director of what we call the White House Hispanic Initiative for short. I'm originally from San Diego, California, born and raised in Chula Vista, and never imagined I'd end up, setting onto this trajectory here that I've had now with so many years in Washington, D.C. on this colder coast. But really fell in love once I came out here for grad school after working in our local San Diego Chamber or Chula Vista Chamber of Commerce and local news station. It was grad school at Georgetown that brought me out, and I just fell in love with the city and the opportunity to do good. And I've had a chance to work in Congress. I served with Javier Becerra for many years, who is now our Health and Human Services Secretary. Had a chance to work on a number of campaigns as well, recognizing how important it is for our diverse communities to work on campaigns. So worked with Congressman Raul Grijalva's campaign in Arizona, the Obama campaigns in 2008, and in 2012, I ran our Virginia Latino Vote Program, which is now where I live. I also worked for our Virginia governor's campaign, Ralph Northam at the time, and spent time while I was here in Washington, D.C. as well with the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda, which is the umbrella of now 40 plus national Latino organizations. And with that group, worked on policy campaigns, built up programs encouraging Latinos to pursue presidential appointments and state level appointments, and also encouraging Latinas to run for office with a campaign called Latinas Represent. And then into that, about 2 years into that work is when I had the opportunity to interview and actually land a job serving in President Obama's administration. So I had the chance to serve at the U.S. Department of Labor under Secretary Tom Bettis's days, was Chief of Staff there for the Mine Safety and Health Administration, and then ended the Obama term as Deputy Chief of Staff of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. So I've had a chance to really get into labor and workforce issues, and that transitioned me into serving on the union side. I had been with the National Education Association for the past 4 years when I was called back in to join the Biden-Harris transition team, which was a real honor. And when I saw how intentionally equity was woven into that process, and I say not just day one, but pre-day one, I just thought to myself, this is incredible. I need to be part of this team and get back into government. And that I wanted to make sure it was the right place, right fit, with great leaderships, and have landed at really what is a dream job here at the Department of Education, leading our White House Hispanic Initiative Office.
Wonderful. Thank you, Melody. And Monique.
Hey everyone, my name is Monique Toussaint. I bring greetings on behalf of my Executive Director, Alexis Holmes, who would have loved to be here today but cannot. I think I am the only career staffer on this panel, and next month makes 15 years for me at the Department of Education. So I've been here a while. I started off doing grants, so I've worked on the Promise Neighborhoods program, Magnet Schools program. I was on the team that created the full service community schools program, like literally my second day, they were writing the NIA. So that was a pretty cool experience. And I've done some family engagement work here to put together the department's portfolio when we were working with Dr. Karen Mapp out of Harvard, which is how I came to work with the initiative. And so the initiative, we're the youngest of all of the initiatives. So we were created under the Obama administration. And so I've been able to see it from beginning to now. So it's our third administration. And so I literally love my job, which is why I've stayed for so long. I love being able to do what we do and look forward to talking more about it later today.
Great. Thank you so much, Monique, and congratulations on those 15 years. I think, one of the things that we wanted to do in this conversation was to actually create a space for some cross conversation and an opportunity for you to speak sort of separately and together. So, but before we kind of jump into what are some common goals that you have, I wonder if you could speak a little bit about what are some of the unique challenges and opportunities that you find throughout the course of your work, sort of representing and pushing agendas around excellence for all of our communities. So anyone can feel free to jump in.
I'll go ahead and jump in. I think one of the things that's just unique in general is that we really are living in a historic moment, which has opened up the runway for us to lean into equity work in a historic way. Whether it's the historic federal resources that this administration has been investing in, allowing states to really deploy to serve equity needs. I think about how we have the most diverse cabinet in history with our leaders and many others. And not just the cabinet members, but, across the ranks and down across the presidential appointments. I'm always inspired as I'm in different meetings and working across the country with our staff, whether they're career appointees. Really dynamic, community-oriented people are leading in a lot of exciting spaces to advance equity. President Biden's also implemented a number of executive orders and presidential memoranda, which are, for the first time ever, has created an environment where 90 plus federal agencies have drafted and are now implementing equity plans. And that's something that I think is really important for our higher ed community, because it means, people often think of the Department of Education as a priority partner, which it is, but also every other agency now is reimagining how do we better collaborate with minority serving institutions? How do we better recruit diverse talent and retain them within our own agency's workforce? How do we better ensure that our research dollars are reaching minority serving institutions and being leveraged to research to address equity issues that we know existed even before the pandemic? For those that want to check out that content, whitehouse.gov/equity is the website. And I think for me, that's just really energizing because people are thinking in very creative and systemic sort of ways. Like I think about how in the Latino community, Hispanic-owned businesses are less than 2% of all agencies that have gotten federal contracts historically. But now there are presidential memoranda requiring agencies to dig deeper and figure out where can they break down barriers for all of our different diverse communities. So there's some great opportunities there as well for different institutions to be thinking about how they might be able to engage in leveraging the historic federal resources and dollars that are available to us. And so I think one of the big challenges associated with that is that there is so much opportunity, whether it's the volume of funding, the numerous ways in which all of our different agencies are trying to advance equity, that I think as a member of the public, it's hard to absorb and really figure out how do you understand what's available, where to go to get all of this information. And so I think with our initiatives and all with our agency partners as well, we've really been on a mission to figure out how do we help make our resources more accessible? How do we help make sure people are taking advantage of these resources and programs like the public service loan forgiveness waiver, which we were just, on a mission to make sure everybody signed up for by August or October 31st, or now the student loan cancellation news that our secretary is really driving forward with. And that's where I think partnerships with organizations and leaders like you and those that are listening to us are so critically important, because we know we can't deliver these messages and these resources alone. We need community help to make sure that these resources are really being fully leveraged.
If I could follow up and related to that is, I think right now in our country, we're at a moment where we have a chance to embrace the humanity of our profession, which is education of children and young adults and then adult education. And I'm saying this after we've experienced a global pandemic, and everybody's had a chance to reflect on our routines and reflect and evaluate our metrics of success. Let's think about these. Do we want to keep these metrics of success? And so we just have a chance to reevaluate these markers. And are we all about just test scores? Or are we about utilizing education to give people a good life on this earth? And in thinking that, it's a great chance to embrace the diversity that is within our country. And our initiative has been working with a lot of different federal agencies to create a 10-year all-of-government plan for the revitalization of Native American languages. And that's something that we're really excited about. And also consulting with tribal nations. So And when Obama was in office, I was fortunate to be one of 15 school principals in the nation to come in and give feedback on ESSA. And when the tribal consultation piece was put in, I was so touched and so happy that our communities were now going to have a voice in our own kids' education, in our own lands, in our own schools. And so to see the executive order that the Biden-Harris administration put forward, mandating that government agencies consult with tribes now, it's very encouraging to see that everybody has an opportunity to have a seat at the table. And that's what the administration is about. So it's just exciting, and it's very exciting.
So I'm not sure that I can add much more to what Melody and Jason said, except I concur with everything that they said. I think it's the opportunities in this administration are tremendous. We have an administration that is very intentional about equity and diversity and inclusion. We all have these executive orders, which and for HBCUs, we actually have a law that requires our agencies to create greater opportunities for HBCUs. And so I think overall, when I think about some of the opportunities and what's so unique about this particular time is that we are coming in at the tail end of a pandemic and a lot of racial upheaval and political divisions, and but we have a moment at this time to step back and reflect and determine whether this is where if what we're doing, as Jason said, is enough, or do we want to do we want to rethink this whole thing around education and rethink the whole, and for me in particular in HBCUs, can we talk about increasing opportunities for research? Everything that happens in this country impacts Black and brown and minority communities at a rate much higher than predominantly white communities or white communities. And so as we think about how we are going to face the next iteration of education or iteration of trying to live together, we've got to, as Jason said, have more voices at the table and more diverse voices at the table. And I just think it's an incredible opportunity. You know, we are, as a nation, can no longer just leave off large swaths of the population and do business as usual. We found that out in the most poignant ways over the last 2 and 3 years, right? And so we've got to broaden our conversations and really think about, you know, and the one thing that I think is critical is as we look in and as we're talking to our partners and our federal agencies, and we challenge them to really look at your mission and determine whether or not or how your mission might change, and how you might deliver your service to the country if you had more diversity in the decision making and in the conversations from the very beginning. And so I think this is an incredible opportunity. It's an incredible moment. I think our biggest challenge is to make sure that this moment turns into a movement. And so post, you know, Biden-Harris, we want that to be our stamp, right? We want that to be kind of the legacy that we leave. And that is we have opened these doors and we have built these relationships. And so America is going to be much stronger because we have so many voices at the table and in terms of the types of services that we deliver to our citizenry. So I concur with what everybody's saying.
And not just happen. And I think that it's a beautiful thing that we get to impact the life of our respective demographics from prenatal all the way to the rest of their life, right? That's a unique thing to do. Like some agencies have a portion in some ways, but we literally cover everything in all of our EOs. And I think it's so important for us to think about the impact that we get to make from early childhood to K-12 to post-secondary, whatever that looks like. And now with the Biden administration adding on economic opportunity, right? We've evolved past just education for some of us. I know, Crystals, you guys have been doing other things for a long time, but thinking about the linkages between education and employment, education and other places in the government where it makes sense, and being able to use our interagency working groups to leverage the federal resources across the department. Because I remember when we were in Promised Neighborhoods, the premise behind that program was that we were given the same communities money from different agencies and not talking to each other, right? And so you have all this money coming into the same community, we call it a footprint. And now we were creating that collaboration between agencies and program officers and trying to figure out how do we make the most sense of the federal dollars going into the communities that are getting the money, that have been getting the money for decades, right? And so I love the fact that all of our EOs in some form or fashion, despite their differences, allow us to be that hub, that connector for all the agencies and our communities. So I love that opportunity for all of us this time around.
And that might be a helpful note just to make sure everybody in listening, kind of understands and knows that all of our offices are created by executive orders. I think perhaps Maggie's, I'm not sure if yours is as well, but those executive orders are really interesting and worth reading because it really does outline the president's, focus and priorities. Like in the case of ours, there are 12 policy goals that are cradle to career goals. As a part of these executive orders, our initiatives are standing up these interagency work groups in very creative and unique ways that haven't been done before. I'm really excited. Our Secretary Cardona asked all agencies to designate teams to us into the Black Americans Initiative so that those teams can help staff into delivering on the policy goals that we're working on. They're all having to draft action plans in support of our equity or our executive orders. And so that's why I really like to emphasize to our friends, especially in the higher ed community, that agencies and staff are really thinking about equity and having to deliver on these plans that they're drafting. So know that this is a really exciting moment to step up and explore creative partnership opportunities that might not have existed before. I also want to make a pitch too while we're here and have you all that we want to grow the ranks of more people here in the administration with us. For the first time ever, we have paid White House internships. That is huge for equity purposes to help students and young professionals, be able to access this exciting opportunity of working in the White House here in Washington, D.C. We've got internships and fellowships, of course, at our different federal agencies. There are career positions, especially right now because of the bipartisan infrastructure law that the president signed. There are also a lot of direct hire jobs. And some of those people don't even have to leave their home cities or states unless they want to come out here to DC. And so if people go to usajobs.gov, you might know that's where you find a lot of the federal job postings on the career side. What you might not know is if you click the infrastructure law jobs tab, you'll see a whole listing of all of these different opportunities. There are project managers, grant managers, all kinds of different staff opportunities. And many of them might say in parentheses, direct hire. And that means agencies have the authority to hire for those roles faster and get people in the books. That's huge to help us grow the ranks, I think, as well, of our diverse talent in the federal agencies. And then when it comes to the presidential appointments, which is what many of us have here as well, people might not know they're still hiring, since the administration already started and is underway. And the reality is, yes, people can be full-time presidential appointees. People can apply to serve on boards and commissions, which could also really be a fantastic opportunity for many that are here listening to this. And there are White House fellowships, which are also very prestigious opportunities for more mid-career professionals. And so you can learn more about those at whitehouse.gov. And if you click on the bottom, you'll see a Join Us link, and you can learn more about all of those opportunities. And I'd also make the pitch that people think about what is called the IPA. It's the Intergovernmental Personnel Act Authority. And this is a really special federal hiring authority that allows for the exchange and temporary assignment of people from outside of government into our agencies. And one of those categories is if people work in higher education institutions. So essentially, there are people who are able to, maybe they're faculty or staff at universities and they're able to get their college's approvals they're able to come and spend a year, maybe 2 years working in government, learn more about the processes, inform our work, and then take that experience out. I know many of us would love to be able to leverage all of these tools to be able to bring more talent into our initiatives, but also just to help grow the ranks of people that understand how to make a difference from within government, because that's helpful when you return back to the outside world as well.
I want to just jump in here real quick. So I think there have been so many great points, and I completely concur with everything that my colleagues have said. And I think just to really underscore what Melody mentioned earlier, and also what Dietra mentioned, we are at a really historic inflection point in our country. And just knowing that from the very top, we have a president and a vice president that on day one of this administration issued an executive order to advance racial equity throughout the entirety of the federal government. This has never been done before. And so I think for many of us, we're like, we think it's common sense that of course we should be ensuring that all communities of, not just communities of color, but all communities in America have access to the same resources in an equitable way. But what we have learned again is throughout COVID, the past 2 to 3 years, so many just longstanding inequities were really laid bare. And so this has been mentioned by several of my colleagues on this panel, but just the need to really take a deep look at, what was working and what wasn't. And are we, as we're building back and really coming out of this pandemic, how are we going to build back in a way that is actually going to address so many longstanding inequities that were exacerbated throughout COVID. I know for many of our communities, communities of color, underrepresented populations, not only did we see educational inequities exacerbated, but also health and economic inequities that we are still dealing with. For the Asian American community too, we also saw an alarming uptick in anti-Asian hate crimes, including bullying in schools. And so, there are so many, I think, longstanding issues that this pandemic has really made us reassess. And this administration is so focused on ensuring that, again, equity is prioritized throughout the entirety of the federal government, not just in the space of education, but in everything that we are doing. And that is, I think, for us all as White House initiatives, a cross-cutting component that we have just to really ensure that as we are addressing so many of these challenges and coming out of the pandemic, whether it's things like the digital divide, the need for greater workforce diversity, the need to just really ensure that we are recovering in a way that is equitable. And there has been trillions, literally trillions of dollars that have gone out into our country and our economy over the past 2 years of this administration. And I think as this was alluded to earlier, we really want to use our White House initiatives to ensure that our institutions, our communities, our various mechanisms who are applying for federal grants and opportunities and contracting opportunities, that they are aware that, again, of all of these really significant investments being made and that they are taking advantage of these opportunities. And just for a little bit of just kind of high level, just the American Rescue Plan alone, we saw over $150 billion invested in institutions of higher education and our K through 12 schools. So there's just so much money out there. And we really do want to make sure that as we are looking to recover from this pandemic and build back in a more equitable way, that we are really ensuring that communities that have not always had a seat at the table or have not always, had access to a lot of these resources do understand the various federal programs, initiatives, and funding that is available to them. And I think that is something that we are all collectively working to do to our respective communities and also collectively as our White House initiatives together, because we know that there is so much that we can do and that we are stronger when we work together. And so many challenges that, again, are unfortunately still plaguing many of our communities that need to be addressed.
Maggie, I was wondering if you had anything to add.
Yeah, happy to. So, structurally, we are a little bit different from the other White House initiatives. So there are 11 centers for faith-based and neighborhood partnerships across the administration, as well as the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. That was reestablished by executive order early on in the administration. So we don't have the, specific sort of racial equity focus in our name. Our role and in partnership with the White House initiatives, of course, is really in working with faith-based and community-based organizations to involve them in the work of government. And so what that means really in this moment is as we look at pandemic response and recovery, for us, the Department of Education, a lot of that is about academic and mental health recovery. But on the mental health recovery, I work, as you can imagine, considerably with the Department of Health and Human Services Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships and their colleagues. We do a lot of kind of crisis prevention and response. So when crises from natural disasters to incidents of gun violence occur in different communities, we know that faith-based and community-based organizations are often sort of the first line of response, and also who are there to care for communities over the long term. And so those are the partners that we work with, and we do that as multiple agencies together, Department of Homeland Security, again, HHS, Department of Justice, and others, making sure that communities have the access to the resources and supports that they need. I also just want to draw attention to another initiative that's administration-wide. Folks may have heard of, in September, President Biden held a United We Stand summit to promote unity and address hate-motivated violence. I think this is a really exciting and important initiative. There are a lot of commitments that were made. If you go to unitedwestand.gov, you can read all of those, including one specifically for our schools. I think there is this incredible, just your question was kind of about the challenges and opportunities. I think the sort of polarization that we are experiencing in these times is the incredible challenge before us, but also the opportunity, all of us colleagues working together on this call, and also, with our colleagues across the administration to really take this on. There's a public-private partnership element to that as well, as we know so many community-based organizations are leading on this work too. Yeah, there's more I could go on about that, but I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And sort of seeing the different interactions, I guess, among the initiatives, as well as sort of some of the unifying, goals and mandates, right? It's really fascinating. And I appreciate the plug to higher ed whenever you can. I mean, I think one of the things that's I think on the one hand amazing, and on the other hand a little can be a little disconcerting, is sort of the nature of time in this kind of work, right? And by that I mean, I remember I was in Sevilla, Spain one day, and I was doing a tour of the cathedral there, and it took them X hundred years to build it. And I was struck by the idea that, the very first people to put down those bricks knew that they were never going to see the cathedral finished. And yet they knew that it was going to be built. And so I think with that sort of framing, I'm curious as to how you each see yourselves contributing to the movement of the work. What legacy do you hope to leave behind? What's the little brick that you see in this work for your own initiative, as well as across, your communities? A big question.
I can jump in. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Melly.
I was just going to share, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, because there is so much work that we have to be very intentional about how we focus on our energy and our time and what we prioritize. And I think, in my case, I really spent a lot of time thinking about, the real opportunity when my term is over. I want to make sure I've helped our community when it comes to money, the historic federal resources, and really leveraging them to address these equity issues that existed even before the pandemic, and it got exacerbated because of them. I think a lot about leadership development, and how through the work that we're doing, can we really create a legacy of growing the ranks of diverse leaders, whether it's in government, on the career side, the interns that we talked about, the IPAs, and even out in the community, in the education sector, in the health sector, and all of these other critical sectors that we know are so important for our communities. I also think a lot about systemic change, and through tactics like our agency action plans that we're asking every agency to deliver into us. Those are systemic actions involving a lot of minds. And even when our term ends, those are going to be actions that were outlined, leaders who are energized about continuing the work. And that will be legacy that will continue on afterwards. And then I often spend a lot of time thinking about the fourth priority of what we do and how we do it, and really centering in what President Biden talks about, of restoring the soul of the country and creating that unity that we know is so important moving forward. And so it's not necessarily a metric that is always quantifiable, but I think in what we do and how we do it, we're in a position to be bringing not just information, but also inspiration into our communities. And so as I think about, how do we, I think about in Spanish, nuestra granita de arena, what's our little piece of sand that we are laying, our little piece of the foundation that we are laying. Those are some of the things that are important in my end as I'm thinking about the White House Hispanic Initiative. And I think, I'll also just share, we've been traveling around the country, hosting these White House Initiative Latino Economic Summits in about 6 different countries, bringing together a lot of different agencies and cabinet officials. The First Lady's even joined us out on the road. And, those in-person events, we're also doing virtual events. And I know all of my colleagues here are doing things in their communities as well. Those opportunities to connect with the community, whether it's in person or digital, are also creating a ripple effect, because people are learning about how to access these systems and these historic resources and programs. And, once people have learned, that can't be undone. And so I think there's a tremendous legacy. And I would say too, a lot of the work that we do is not just the presidential appointees, but also involving our career staff and our external stakeholders. And that also helps ensure that this good work lives on beyond our days.
And I'll follow up to that. If Alexis was here, she had 3 I's that she goes by: inspiration, information, and innovation. And so what that means for us is similar to Melody in the sense that for us, inspiration is making sure that Black communities and students see themselves. So when we have our events and we have our outreach programming, we make sure that we see the scholars, we see the students, we see the families. We have our 23-year-old NASA, astronaut on our panel, so they see themselves, and we help to reframe the narrative for what's aspirational for them, as well as information. So it's not enough for us to just do outreach, but it's also important for us to show them, how do you access these resources without us telling you every month in a newsletter or via a tweet, but while communicating that to them, empowering them to find the information for themselves. Because we've often find our communities are not doing things, not because they're not capable of doing it, but because they don't know it exists. So our job is to be that hub of information and empower them to find it beyond us giving it to them. And then finally, innovation, right? And now that you know it's possible, go forth and do. And what creative things that you're already doing in your community that we don't know about, that we can amplify. So how do we amplify the best and promising practices? So when we think about legacy, for me, sometimes I get to sit a little longer. So I've sat in this spot for 3 administrations. So I see the things that come and go as quickly or as easily as the stroke of a pen. But I think the important part of the work that we're doing is, as long as we're touching students and families and communities in a way that no matter what happens politically, they can still thrive, not just survive, but thrive in their schools and communities, we're doing our job here.
So, whenever I start a new job, I always try to reflect early on what kind of impact I want to have and what kind of legacy, not so much my legacy, but the legacy of this administration as it relates to the job that I'm doing. And I came in here really thinking about, I think the greatest thing for me is to change the narrative around HBCUs. When people talk about historically Black colleges or universities or minority serving institutions, it's always in a deficit model, right? It's always, let's do for them, let's help them, which is, we don't deny help. We will receive it. But the other piece of that is to understand the excellence that's within these organizations. And these are universities that have, our first HBCU was established 25 years before slavery ended. Think about that. Think about it. 185 years, our first HBCU is here. Think about all the things, and HBCUs have been in the front line of every historic moment in this country, whether it's slavery, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, civil rights, even today, Black Lives Matter. We've been at the front of all of that. And so a part of what I need and what I want and is to show the excellence that's within these universities. And the very fact that the Biden-Harris administration has put so much support behind them, has raised them to a level that they've never been raised before. This is the best administration, hands down, ever in the history of this country for HBCUs, hands down. And so when I leave here, I need our HBCUs to know that, right? But I also need the general public to know the product that comes out of our HBCUs and why it's important to include HBCUs in some of the research or the programs or the funding that you have. You know, when you think about HBCUs, we produce 85% of the Black judges today started at an HBCU. Over 50% of Black teachers started at an HBCU. I could go on and on and on. And so when I think about legacy, one, I think about, I want people to look at us and to know our story. In spite of the fact that we've been here for 185 years, in spite of the fact that we have been discriminated against and been under-resourced for that entire time, we still produced an excellent product. You know, I'm a witness. I came from a small rural town in Virginia. I was on Pell. My parents were, my father worked was a mechanic and my mother worked in a factory. And I was first generation. And here I am leading the White House Initiative on HBCUs. And so and I give that, the credit goes to Hampton University because they helped me see what was inside of me and they helped bring that out. And so when I think about the legacy that I would like to leave is to let people understand, help people understand what an HBCU is in the end product. So, and then, you know, there are other things that I've thought about, you know, what can we realistically do, right? When you look at some of the things, and you all know this better than most, when you look at some of the under-resourced schools that we have in this community, our HBCUs, most of the students who go to an HBCU received their K-12 education from under-resourced schools. They did not prepare them for higher education. And so so I got to think about what is realistic. What can we realistically happen? And I'm having these conversations with presidents and with organizations and companies every single day, trying to figure out what is it, the things that we can leave that will make a difference. And so we're looking at research, we're looking at infrastructure. Our buildings are caving, they're over 100 years old. We have deferred maintenance that we have to deal with. There's 4 or 5 different areas that I'm looking at, but the biggest thing for me is to make sure that when I leave this place, people understand the importance that the Biden-Harris administration placed on HBCUs. And so as Melanie talked about, as we're looking at our agency plans, you know, we're working with our agencies to change that culture, right? And so if that's not easy to do, because the hardest thing you can do is change a culture in an organization that's been around forever. But these plans, and this is a great opportunity for us to begin to have those conversations, and each one of us have an opportunity to talk and work with our agencies and build these relationships. And so when we leave, the relationships remain, and hopefully we can be a more inclusive government. So.
I wish I said all of that, but just kind of inserted myself and tribal colleges. That was awesome. And just building on,
I speak for everyone.
just building on building on everyone's comments. I think just for me, a message to UCEA members and students is that we're a part of an initiative, and initiatives speak to what you were saying, Monica, and it's a start. So we're a part of these starts of momentum, and what we're a part of is going to continue, and we hope you all catch up. We hope you, and because UCEA is supposed to build leaders, right? And you have such a chance to build leaders as professors and also building school leaders in the K-12. And to do it, you can continue the status quo, or you can get on board with what's going on, because we know what we need. We need everybody to have a seat at the table. And we need the equity issue addressed in every facet of our society. And leaders are the ones who do this. And leader prep programs make the leaders to do this. And we need to be creative and think about how do we educate in K-12 and higher ed, vocational, early childhood, and career development programs. And how do we do that? And I myself am a product of a tribal college, and a Little Bighorn Tribal College in Crow Agency, Montana. And going through that process, it was so empowering. It was so empowering. And I grew up on a reservation, but I was never with 100% Native American student body, and never being exposed in my K-12 experience to Native American authors. And then going to tribal college and then realizing that Native Americans were writing books, it was like, it was very empowering to see myself in the classroom. And I had that only in tribal college. And so rethinking how we can do education, forgive my lack of academic terms, but how we can do this education thing, rethink it. We can go with the status quo. We've seen where it brought us to the past few years, or we can really give everybody a seat at the table in all facets of society.
I can jump in next. In addition to, I think, cultivating partnerships with faith-based and community-based organizations in order to accomplish the work of government, we need those partnerships that can transcend administrations as well. We want organizations to be plugged in for the long haul. In addition to that work, one of the things that we hope to contribute during our time with this administration is really contributing to the body of work around cultivating that cross-cultural literacy, religious literacy, promoting unity, confronting hate. And I think educators have the opportunity and ability to foster safe and inclusive learning environments for all students. The challenge has never been greater, and given the unique faith focus of our office, we spend a lot of time focusing on religious freedom and religious literacy and how we can support educators in those efforts. So to explain what I mean by that is, how can we ensure that all students are able to access an education free from discrimination, harassment, bullying on the basis of religion or other protected characteristics? How can we help educators in public schools navigate and uphold the separation of church and state while still honoring and celebrating the religious diversity and other forms of difference that exist within their classroom? And then how do we ensure no one fears for their safety, whether they're going to their house of worship or they're attending their faith-based school, that they might be targeted because of how they choose to worship? And that, on that point, that's the kind of work that we're doing with our interagency partners as well. Looking to advance the cause of religious freedom within this administration, and recognizing that for many religious communities, the question of religious freedom really is one of survival still, of knowing that I can go out in the world and be safe. And so kind of on that whole spectrum of like cultivating that recognition of difference as a skill that we know that that our students need, right, to recognize difference, whether that's on the basis of religion or other characteristics, from the earliest ages all the way to the workforce. They need to have those skills, but also, recognizing what religious freedom could look like within public policy, and does look like within public policy, and how we help educators and others uphold that and protect that.
Really quickly, I'll just jump in. I know we're short on time, but I think there's so many cross-cutting, even just hearing my other colleagues talking about their what they're thinking about in terms of legacy. I think all of us are committed to really creating transformative and lasting change that will be hopefully institutionalized and sustained, regardless of who was in office at any given point in time. For our White House initiative, a lot of that is focused on similar priorities that have been raised by my colleagues, but things like narrative change and also just empowering communities through capacity building, just building that muscle memory so that they are informed and educated to know that regardless of who is in office, that there are federal resources that are available, whether it's funding, programs, procurement opportunities, just really making sure that we can ensure our communities are aware of these opportunities and know that they exist and how to apply for various pots of funding, how to advocate for themselves when it comes to pushing for various programs, policy changes. So I think all of that is really critical, and especially for the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community, we often, deal with various stereotypes, including the model minority myth, which assumes that all of our communities are high achieving. When you lump together the data, that oftentimes does not paint a full narrative of the disparities, significant disparities that certain subpopulations within the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander population face. There's also the perpetual foreigner myth, which unfortunately we have seen countless times throughout COVID lead to violence and hate crimes against our community due to misinformation and disinformation, tying our communities to any number of things, in this case with COVID. And so there's just so much, I think, in terms of education that we are really trying to do. And we know that starts by having conversations, and all of you are our audience members are in very unique positions to be able to share a lot of your perspectives, but also to be a catalyst for that narrative change. I think for all of our communities in terms of ensuring that people understand not just the importance and significance of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, but also the history, of our country, and being really able to share and dispel harmful narratives and stereotypes that have long, unfortunately, plagued so many of our communities represented here today. So for us, longstanding change within government is, we know government moves slowly, but once we are able to actually do something, it's actually very difficult to undo that. And what we are seeing is that we're actually operating under a lot of policies, including a language access executive order that was created in the 90s. Our race and ethnicity data collection standards for the federal government were also created in the 90s, and we are still using those same standards. So I know the Biden-Harris administration is really committed to trying to improve a number of those really big initiatives, both with regard to data equity, both regard to language access, promoting racial justice throughout the entirety of government. So I think, utilizing the time that we have, we are very optimistic about the impact that we can have, not just now throughout the remainder of this first term of the administration, but really for generations to come, just knowing again how long it does take to influence and change policy in government. But once it's done, again, it oftentimes does have a very lasting impact that can last decades, if not longer. So we are really hoping to use this historic moment in time to be able to ensure that we're not just building back to the status quo, but that we are really thinking about the lasting impact that we can have that will build a brighter future for our children and for generations to come.
This conversation could go on for hours, I know. So I'm going to ask you like a lightning round question, and then we can wrap this up, because I think one of the things that you have all talked about, and I know that you work on, is sort of, how do your initiatives work together collaboratively to move forward a more united agenda when it comes to individual communities, but also across the communities. And so, sort of, I don't know, a lesson or a piece of advice or something on the nature of this sort of cross-cultural solidarity as an opportunity to improve education, in all of our communities. So kind of lightning round. And I don't know, Melody, can you go first? And I'll, since you were last, you can go first.
Sure. I think one thing that we all try to commit to is making sure that we are intentional about making time to meet regularly with our sister initiatives. So I think it's really important, as we're thinking about this solidarity and alliance work, that we make it a priority. And that means making time for it, being mindful about how our work can be intersectional. Whenever I am speaking at different events, I always mention that not only is there a White House Hispanic initiative, we have our sister initiatives. And then when there are opportunities to respond, whether it's local efforts or kind of more systemic efforts, like there's a White House data equity team, we're all talking about what we're learning so we can figure out how we can connect the dots and support each other, whether that means all of us coming in to collaborate and work together, or whether that means one of us kind of being in a certain space and being able to speak and represent and learn and bring information back to the others. But I think the most important sort of lesson learned is that this coalition work matters. It must be done, and you've got to prioritize and make time for it.
Crystal.
Sorry, I was having a little trouble unmuting. I agree completely. And I think we are so fortunate to be able to have each other. We just this space of having just the ability to collaborate across our various communities and ensure that, we are working together. We all know that our nation is strengthened by our diversity, and we are really empowered just by the unity that we have amongst our various White House initiatives to push out collective opportunities, ensuring that various initiatives, programs, and funding opportunities from this administration are really reaching our hardest to reach communities, including so many of our communities represented here today. And to Melody's point, that coalition work matters. It takes time, but it really is so critical to ensuring that we have that unity and that, we are not leaving any community behind, that we all have a seat at the table and have access to equitable access to the various resources from the government. So I am just so grateful to UCEA for convening us today, because I think this just shows again what a strong commitment this administration has to empowering each of our respective community based constituency groups, but also to ensuring that we all have a seat at the table, we all have representation and the ability to really make lasting change.
Maggie.
I mean, just echoing that, when we look at the kind of recovery that we're doing in the education space, we're looking at really the whole school community, right? Not just the individual educational institutions themselves, but how the entire community is around that, both served by the school in some cases, and then serving the school with out of school time providers, and the engagement of faith communities and neighborhood organizations in all of those efforts. So I think that is a clear opportunity where, as all of the folks on this call and others, we could come together and play a connective role in terms of the kinds of resources that are available to serve those communities, but also to kind of cultivate some of those same partnerships at the national level as at the local level around those institutions.
Deidre.
Okay, since it's lightning round, can I just say ditto?
Yes, you can.
To everything, but I do want to just reemphasize what Melody said, and that is we do come together on a regular basis to make sure that as we are out in our prospective areas, that we are talking about the whole of our organizations or of all of the initiatives. And, even to the point where we are looking for ways to do even more together, to send an even louder message from the Biden-Harris administration around equity and inclusion. So, that's part of what we do on a regular basis.
Jason.
I agree with all of the above, and just looking for those ways to work together and making sure that our efforts strengthen each other's efforts, and being mindful of everything that's going on. It's really helpful. And I think even outside of the initiatives here, all of us are involved in working across different departments, and I'm with different federal agencies, and we're working everywhere where our initiatives touch. So whether it's the Department of Ed, Department of Labor, Department of Interior, Health and Human Services, like we're working across in those ways too. So
Monique, you get the last word.
I know they call my last name 2 cents. I also have something to say, right? Since elementary school. So yeah, I grew up in St. Thomas, so my last name is pronounced differently when I'm back home. But so I would like to say, of course, ditto to what everyone said, but specifically for the higher community, I love to leave people with like next steps and action items. So as we think about how we work together across our initiatives, for you higher ed leaders, we want you to think deeply about teacher prep programs and incorporating cultural competency training into those programs as we we're at a unique place in our term where we're thinking about educator diversity. So we want to make sure that the teachers coming out of those pipelines, if they're not diverse, they at least know how to interact with diverse communities. We want to think about how do we encourage family engagement at the higher ed level. We want to think about community engagement and how do we embrace non-traditional students, how we promote college prep programs like the TRIO programs that we fund here at Ed, such as Gear Up and Upper Bounds, dual enrollment to help offset the cost of college, thinking about not just diversifying the teacher pipeline, but diversifying faculty. That's become something for us here across the initiatives to think about, including tenured positions and transparency and access to resources, such as research grants and positions, such as principals and lead investigators of those research grants. And then finally, looking at equity on campuses for diverse students, right? So making sure we address food insecurity, like our kids are getting there on scholarship, but they don't have enough money for meals. Thinking about scholarship displacement. If you're a predominantly white institution where you have these large pots of money and students get outside scholarships, making sure you're not taking away what they get federally to accommodate that. And then finally, we want to make sure that across our initiatives and on your campuses, you make space for student voice. We do everything we do for them. And so we want to make sure that we give them space. We amplify their voices in our initiatives, but also as higher ed leaders, you ask them what's best for them as you do this work. Thank you.
Wonderful way to end this conversation, I think, focusing on the students and the reasons we're all involved in this work. Again, I can't thank you enough all for taking time out of your very busy schedules to share your thoughts and to give some inspiration, innovation, and information. Did I get that wrong already? Monique, to all of our UCA members. I look forward to learning more from all of what you've said and enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you so much again. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you, UCEA, for listening in on this amazing panel. And I look forward to seeing you all in Seattle for the rest of Convention 2022.